Well, joining me now is former Associate Counsel to George W. Bush and Executive Director of the National Security Institute, Jamil Jaffer. Evening, Jamil. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's talk about those comments by Donald Trump. Is he teasing? Are you encouraged by them? Surely it is in everyone's interest to try and find a way to end this war. But I guess it's a case of whether the parties can meet on middle ground.
No, that's exactly right. I think it's obviously a positive sign that we're seeing the potential resumption of talks in Pakistan between Iran and the United States. But to your point, the question is, can there be a meeting of minds between these two parties? Are they too far apart? What's clear is that they were pretty far apart. We were pretty far apart on this question of how long and whether Iran can enrich domestically, what's to be done with the current enriched materials. And I think, and this is a key question, Donald Trump had made clear before, part of his problem with the Obama nuclear deal was that it didn't cover things like ballistic missiles, like the support of terrorism, like Iran's malign activities in the region. It's not clear that's on the table, but that was a key stopping point for him. And so the question is, will those issues be brought onto the table, and will those be resolved in this negotiation, or will it just be about nuclear enrichment and the Straits of Hormuz?
What do you make of reports as to the way the last talks ended? The fact that although the sides were far apart on whether Iran could completely disown any claim to using using nuclear power, they said 5 years. The US said 20 years. They are quite some way apart, but that is what negotiations are all about, isn't it?
Sure. Well, look, the U.S. position historically on domestic enrichment of uranium has been zero, not for anyone that doesn't have a current nuclear program. And you just look at our allies, the United Arab Emirates. Before the Iran nuclear deal that President Obama entered into with Iran, we had told the UAE, hey, look, we're not going to let you have domestic enrichment. We will sell you and give you a committed supply of uranium if what you want is a civilian nuclear program. Russia has that capability as well. So if Iran's worried the U.S. won't supply it, they get supplies from Russia. But this idea that you need domestic enrichment, the only reason to have domestic enrichment is to eventually have the freedom and the capability to have a nuclear weapons program. And so there's no need for that if you want a civilian program. Plenty of countries around the world have agreements with the United States or with Russia to supply them uranium. So if what the Iranians really want is nuclear energy and for civilian power, then they don't need a domestic enrichment program. But it appears now that is now off the table, this question of when they can enrich, of whether they can enrich. Now the question is when. Is it 20 years? Is it 5 years? And that's a negotiable thing. The problem is that is a long way off from prior historic U.S. position other than the Obama nuclear deal, which, of course, President Trump walked away from, saying it was a terrible deal for this very reason.
Yeah, look, I mean, is there any advantage to Iran enriching domestically in that it would save them money? Would they have to buy from the US the ability to have a civilian nuclear program?
So look, I think Iran could buy from the U.S. It could buy from Russia. It's really a question of, the technology, and that we agree with them and other nations to give them the nuclear technology. The question is, where do you get your uranium supply to fuel those reactors? And there are multiple vendors for that. Again, the United States and Russia are the primary ones. Will that cost money? Of course it'll cost money. Is it cheaper than building a domestic enrichment program? It's absolutely cheaper than enriching domestically. The only reason to enrich domestically is if you want the freedom down the road to have a nuclear weapons program, so you can go beyond the 3.5 or 3.67% you require for a civilian program, go to 60 for nuclear submarines, go to 80 or 90 for weapons grade, and then above that for real weapons grade. That's the fundamental problem. And the important thing to remember, Kate, is that when you're enriching uranium, the bulk of the work is in that early stage. So when you get to 20, and particularly when you get to 60, then you're only really 5% more work away from 90%, 95% enriched uranium for weapons. And so even though it's a big numbers gap, the amount of work you need to put in is much smaller in the way that uranium enrichment is done today.
Okay, so the US would be happy to sell them the capability. Iran must agree to that, but it's just about the number of years, really. I mean, is that the only issue holding things up? Could there be other things in the background? Have you heard of other murmurings? Because what's been happening in these peace negotiations so far is we have been given one interpretation by the United States. Certainly the way that J.D. Vance exited at the weekend dashed everyone's hopes. It seemed like they were further away than ever. And now we understand as reported by the New York Times. We understand the context behind that, and it maybe looks like J.D. Vance inflamed things a little bit by storming out. Maybe that's part of his negotiation tactic. I don't know. But are we going to be surprised by anything else?
Well, I was going to say that is part of that oftentimes can be part of the negotiation tactic, walking out and saying, we're done here. Yeah. You need to come to me. That's oftentimes a negotiating tactic. Obviously, the other thing that is absolutely in play remains this question of transiting the Strait of Hormuz, right? Can Iran control it? Can they exact tolls for that? The U.S. has taken a very clear position. This is an international waterway. You can't control it. You can't extract tolls from it. So we'll see about how that gets negotiated. But I think the most important thing that we haven't heard any talk about, but that was a clear starting point for the negotiation for the U.S., or has been at least since this war began and before that under the Trump administration, which is Iran cannot support terrorist groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And of course, Iran's position is the exact opposite. It's you need to stop making war against our terrorist allies, Hezbollah and Lebanon. And so, the two parties are very far apart on the support of terrorism. And it's not clear that we're going to reconcile that. That hasn't come up in the questions about where the negotiating positions are on that. But if the U.S. gives that up, then we're getting back into a nuclear deal that's very similar in context to the Obama nuclear deal, one that President Trump walked away from saying it was terrible. So if he gets back into a nuclear deal, and yes, it's 20 years and doesn't give them enrichment, at least for that period of time, President Obama allowed them to have enrichment for any period of time, but that the deal ended in 10. So it's going to be a longer deal, and it wouldn't involve enrichment up front. It's still a variant on that. And so that's a big question. What about terrorism? What about malign activities in the region? What about all the things, what Iran does to its people? Remember, President Trump got in this fight saying help is on the way to the Iranian protesters. What about them? We haven't talked about them in these negotiations for the better part of, a few weeks in immediate time, and even since the war began. And we talked about regime change. The president talked about that in his first message on Truth Social. That's not in the cards either. So what happens when you leave an Iranian regime in place that, yes, has a new leader, but the son of the former leader, who now is very committed against the United States, having been bombed by us for Israel for weeks, right? Is that a good place to leave it? Or do you really need to finish the job? And if you're finishing the job, can that be achieved through negotiations? That seems hard to believe.
Jamil, thank you so much for being with us. Jamil Jaffer, who's Executive Director of the National Security Institute, former Associate Counsel to President George W. Bush. Good to have you with us.